Take a slow, deep breath, in and out. Feel the cool air of the north drift gently across your skin, calm, ancient, and endless. Somewhere beyond the northern seas, where the aurora dances above the ice, the wind still carries the songs of forgotten men. They were sailors and dreamers, blacksmiths and poets, warriors and wanderers, bound not by borders, but by the call of the horizon. Their world was carved by frost and fire, the scent of pine and salt, the hum of oars striking the tide, the echo of ancient chants rolling through the mist. They built longships that kissed the sea, and temples that whispered to the sky. Once, they were called the Vikings, children of the storm, keepers of saga and steel. They rose from wooden shores and sailed into eternity, leaving behind stories carved not on stone, but on memory. But even the brightest flame must flicker, and even the proudest voyage must find its rest. So tonight, as your heartbeat slows and the night folds softly around you, we will drift together through the rise and fall of the Norse world. Inhale, hold, and exhale. Let the waves cradle your thoughts. Let the past become your lullaby. Fall asleep to the Norse legends of the Vikings. Rise and fall. Take another slow breath in and let it go. Feel the quiet weight of the air around you, cool, still, untouched. Before the sagas, before the ships, there was only this, the land. In the far north of the world, where mountains rise like frozen waves and rivers run with silver light, the first warmth of summer touches the soil for only a fleeting moment. Here, dawn arrives slowly, as if the sun must think twice before waking such a peaceful earth. Mist lingers over dark pine forests. Reindeer move like shadows between the trees. Streams hum soft songs to the stones. This was the cradle of the Norse, a place where beauty and hardship shared the same breath. For half the year, the sun refused to set, washing the valleys in endless day. For the other half, darkness returned like an old friend, blanketing the fjords in silence and frost. People learned to listen. They listened to the wind, to the creak of wood in winter, to the sigh of the sea beyond the cliffs. Each sound was a teacher, a whisper of survival. The first villages stood near the edge of forests, where timber was life. Longhouses stretched wide and low, their thatched roofs heavy with snow, their hearths glowing like small suns in the endless night. Inside, families gathered close, warmth shared not only by fire, but by stories. They spoke of the earth as living. They called the mountains the bones of the gods, and the sea their restless child. In every crack of thunder, they heard Odin's voice, in every flicker of flame, the laughter of Loki. Nature was not apart from them. It was a mirror of their own spirit, fierce, unpredictable, but always alive. When spring returned, the ice broke with a sound like thunder. Rivers roared down from the highlands, carrying memories of the snow. Men shaped trees into oars and hulls. Women planted barley and flax in the softened earth. Children chased the first light of morning, their laughter echoing across meadows still wet with dew. There were no kings yet, no warriors seeking fame, only families bound by land and sky. They hunted, fished, and learned to read the seasons like pages in an endless book. The scent of smoke and pine was the language of home. And above all, they understood one truth. To live here, one must live with patience. The Norse world did not promise comfort, it offered meaning. Each storm was a reminder of strength. Each clear night beneath the stars, a reminder of wonder. They lived not for abundance, but for balance. The sky changed color like breathing, pale blue to silver, silver to violet. Wolves howled somewhere beyond the ridge, their voices rolling over snow-capped hills. Far in the distance, a single torch flickered from a longhouse door, painting a small circle of warmth in the endless dark. It is said that during these quiet ages, the Norse began to dream of far horizons. When they looked to the sea, they didn't see an end. They saw a road, and somewhere beyond that road, they imagined the gods themselves waiting. The first boats were small and shy, little shells of wood tied together with hope. Men watched the waves, testing them, whispering prayers to unseen powers. Every voyage was a question to the world. Will you let us pass? And sometimes the world answered gently. Other times it answered with storms. But the Norse were not easily turned back. They learned to bend with the wind, to trust the sea's moods as one trusts a friend. And slowly, their courage became their compass. As night returns, listen now. The wind carries the same rhythm it carried 1,000 years ago. The same sigh across the pines, the same hush over the fjords. Close your eyes for a moment. You can almost hear the breath of that first dawn, cool and pure, touching the faces of people who did not yet know the word Viking, but already carried its spirit in their veins. Inhale, hold, exhale. The land is breathing with you. And somewhere in its quiet heart, the story of the North has just begun. Breathe in and out. Let the world outside grow quiet, until all that remains is the low hum of memory. Long before kingdoms or crowns, there were the settlers, wanderers who came by sea, following birds and stars, guided by instinct more than map. They found the edges of the northern world, narrow valleys between cliffs of granite, and bays where the tides sang like voices of the unseen. Here, they built their homes, not to conquer the earth, but to belong to it. The first Norse people lived between sky and sea, a place both harsh and sacred. They tilled thin soil and hunted elk through whispering woods. At night, they gathered by firelight, their faces flickering like ghosts between shadow and flame. Each spark that leapt from the wood was, to them, a sign, a reminder that the world was alive, watching, breathing. In the dark months of winter, the aurora would dance above their roofs, ribbons of green and violet curling through the heavens. They called it the breath of the gods. Children watched in silence, certain that the spirits of the dead were sailing across the sky in bright ships of light. To these people, every part of the land carried a soul. Rocks could speak, rivers could listen, and trees remembered what men forgot. They gave offerings to waterfalls and buried grain for the spirits of the ground. Before they plowed a field, they whispered to the earth, asking permission. Before they felled a tree, they touched its bark and waited for its silence to answer. Their gods were not distant. They walked among storms and shadows. Odin, the wanderer, who traded an eye for wisdom, drifted through the forests in disguise. Thor, red-bearded and strong, thundered above the clouds, protecting humankind from what lurked in the dark. And Loki, the trickster, danced between laughter and ruin, teaching that even chaos had its place. But the most sacred of them all was Freya, the goddess of love, fertility, and beauty. She was said to weep golden tears, each one becoming amber when it touched the sea. When the first settlers found pieces of that amber washed ashore, they held them close to their hearts, believing they carried her blessings home. Their temples were not stone palaces, but circles of wood and sky. They raised tall posts carved with faces, and hung them with garlands of grass and shells. When storms came, they sang louder. When the sun returned, they feasted beneath it, not to worship power, but to celebrate balance. In these gatherings, the first sagas were born. The old would speak, the young would listen. Stories of giants and heroes, of the world's creation and its inevitable end. They told of Yggdrasil, the world tree, its roots touching the realm of the dead, its crown brushing the heavens, and beneath its branches, all things, gods, men, and beasts, were connected by invisible threads. These tales were not merely stories, they were maps of meaning. To live was to take one's place upon the tree. To die was simply to fall into its roots, where dreams and memory intertwined. The Norse did not fear death the way we do. They saw it as returning home, crossing through the mist to the hall of ancestors. Sometimes, when the wind howled through the fjords, they believed it was those same ancestors calling back, reminding the living to stay brave, to stay kind, to remember who they were. Each winter, they lit great fires called blot, offerings of thanks and hope. The flames rose high into the dark, painting the snow in shades of copper and gold. In that light, they sang songs older than words, voices low and slow, matching the rhythm of the heartbeat itself. For in those songs, they found warmth against the cold, and peace against the long night. As seasons turned, their faith became the pulse of their lives. Every harvest, every storm, every birth, every farewell, all was woven into the same rhythm of breath and flame. And in that rhythm, something ancient stirred, a sense that they were not alone in the universe, but part of a great, breathing whole. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the sound of the wind against wooden walls, the murmur of a sleeping village, the faint crackle of fire echoing through the dark. Inhale, 4 counts. Hold, 7. Exhale, 8. As you drift, remember this. The first Norse settlers did not pray to be spared from hardship. They prayed to endure it with grace. And in that quiet endurance, the soul of the Viking world began to awaken. Take a deep breath and let it go. Imagine the long shadow of dawn stretching over the northern hills, soft light touching the edge of the fjords, glimmering on wet stones and sleeping boats. The age of myth was not ending. It was taking shape in human hands. From scattered villages and lonely farms, people began to gather. They met at river crossings, at meadows where the air smelled of salt and grass, bringing together stories, trade, and trust. No one called it a kingdom yet, only a thing, a meeting, where free men spoke beneath open skies. Here, justice was born not from decree, but from memory. Each man stood equal in the circle, his words weighed by honor and the witness of others. The Norse had no palaces, no golden crowns, but they had something older, the quiet strength of belonging. Each settlement knew its role, the smith, the farmer, the sailor, the weaver. Together they shaped a rhythm of survival that would outlast empires. When the snows melted, they built new ships. When the harvest ripened, they gave thanks to Freya, the god of fertility and good seasons. And when winter came again, they returned to their halls, sealing themselves against the dark with laughter and song. The longhouse was their heart, a single room for fire, food, and family. Beams of oak stretched like ribs above, smoke curling into the cold night through an open roof. At one end burned the hearth, at the other, carved figures of gods watched silently. The smell of roasted meat, pine resin, and wool hung in the air, a scent both human and eternal. Life was hard, but it was also whole. There were no walls between the sacred and the ordinary, no distance between work and worship. When they forged iron, they prayed. When they fished, they sang. When they buried their dead, they spoke softly, believing the soul lingered until it found its way into the wind. As generations passed, one thing grew constant: the sea. It was both mirror and teacher, always whispering its restless hymn. They built their longships long before they called themselves Vikings, sleek bodies of oak that could glide across water like living creatures. Each ship had a soul, its keel carved with runes, its prow shaped like dragons to guard against evil. To the Norse, the sea was never empty. It was a road, a dream, a test. The men learned the language of waves. They could read the horizon like scripture. The way clouds gathered, the way gulls circled, the smell of salt shifting in the wind. They could hear a storm before it formed, taste land before it appeared. This intuition became their compass long before they had maps. And as the ships multiplied, so too did the hunger for discovery. Beyond the fjords, beyond the mist, they imagined new lands, places of green valleys and wide rivers, where trade and tale could flourish. They began to sail farther, first to the nearby isles, then to distant shores. Each voyage added a thread to the great fabric of their people. But what truly bound them together was not conquest, it was kinship. When one village suffered, another shared its grain. When storms took a ship, those who remained sang its name, so the lost would not vanish into silence. They believed remembrance was the truest immortality. Slowly, small chiefs rose among them, leaders not by fear, but by respect. They led in battle, but more importantly, in peace. They resolved disputes, offered protection, and forged alliances that stretched across valleys and seas. It was not yet a single kingdom, but the idea of one was taking root. The dream of a people bound not by walls, but by words and will. At night, under stars that burned like silver runes, those early leaders stood by the fire and wondered what destiny awaited them. Did the gods still walk among them? Would the wind carry their names beyond the horizon? Or would their stories, like embers, fade quietly into the dark? No one knew. But they built anyway. They sailed anyway. They believed anyway. For to live in the north was to live by faith, not in temples or kings. but in the strength of one's hands, the warmth of one's hearth, and the endless voice of the sea. The world was still small then, but the Norse heart was growing vast. Each voyage carried them farther, and each return brought them closer to unity, to memory, to legend. Inhale, hold for a moment, and exhale. The sea breathes with you, the fire hums beside you, and the first pulse of the Viking age has begun to stir. Breathe in, slowly. Let your shoulders loosen. The night is quiet now, and the tide moves softly, as though the world itself is remembering. There was a time when the North glowed with life, a golden age, when courage met craftsmanship, and the people of the fjords built not just ships, but stories that could cross the sea. Villages turned into towns, their longhouses growing into halls of feasting and laughter. Smoke from hearths curled into pale skies, carrying the scent of roasted fish, bread, and honey. Children ran along frozen shores, chasing gulls that rose like white spirits into the air. And over everything, the calm pulse of rhythm. Work, worship, and wonder braided together into one steady breath. The Norse were not simply warriors, they were makers. Hands that could wield an axe could also carve a legend. Iron bent to their will, becoming blades and brooches, rings and runes. Wood became ships, shields, doors, and dreams. Every object held a story, of family, of faith, of the fragile beauty of time. When the long summer came, they sailed. Their ships spread like silver leaves over the water, catching the wind, carrying amber, furs, wool, and stories to lands far beyond the horizon. They reached the coasts of England, Ireland, and Francia, traded with the Slavs and the Russ, even touched the edges of the Byzantine world. In every harbour, they brought two things: the strength of their craft and the curiosity of their hearts. Merchants returned home with silks from the East, coins from Arabia, and spices whose scent lingered in the halls for days. The world was opening, and the Norse were listening. They began to weave foreign patterns into their own, blending old with new, until art itself became a map of connection. Brooches bore crosses beside hammer symbols, and songs mixed strange words from distant tongues. But for all their reach, their hearts remained anchored to the north. Every voyage ended where the mountains met the sea, where light spilled over stone and water in long, endless twilight. There, they built their most beautiful things. Mead halls filled with gold light, where laughter echoed under beams carved with dragons and vines. Farms that shimmered with barley fields, bending under the sun like golden seas. Temples where music rose with the smoke of pine, drifting through open doors into the wind. And when night returned, they gathered again by the fire. Stories were told not to pass time, but to hold time, to keep what they loved from vanishing. An old woman might tell of a hero who crossed oceans guided only by a raven's flight. A boy might ask if the gods still watched them, and someone, smiling through the flicker of flame, would answer, "They watch us in the way the sea watches the shore, always leaving, always returning." Peace, though brief, became their teacher. The people learned to cherish the quiet hours between storms. They learned that gold shines only because there is darkness to reflect it. They learned that a song, softly sung, can last longer than a war cry. This was the balance the Norse understood, that life's worth was not in victory, but in memory. And so, the sagas grew longer. Poets were honored like kings, for they preserved what the sword could not. Their verses carried the weight of wind and wave, singing of bravery, loyalty, love, and loss, not as separate things, but as one eternal thread. In those golden years, time felt slower. Days stretched wide as the northern sky. Fires burned low and gentle, and even the restless sea seemed to sigh with contentment. Close your eyes now. Imagine a hall lit by hundreds of candles, their flames swaying with each breath of the wind. Hear the hum of soft voices, stories floating through the air like embers. Outside, snow drifts quietly down, covering the world in peace. Inhale and exhale. The golden age of the north glows still, not in gold or silver, but in the memory of warmth shared, laughter echoed, and songs that refused to fade. They did not know it then, but the world was already beginning to turn. The light that burns brightest is also the light that casts the longest shadow. And soon, those shadows would rise, bringing with them the hunger for power, and the storms that no fire could hold back. For now, though, let the memory rest. Let the world remain golden a little longer. Breathe softly. Sleep deeper. The story continues. Take another slow breath in. Hold for a heartbeat. And exhale, like a wave returning to the sea. The north had grown restless. The golden age had ripened, and from its calm came a calling. The sound of oars striking water, the whisper of distant winds promising discovery. To the Norse, the world had never been a cage. It was a living map, drawn by memory and myth, waiting to be touched by hand and sail. And so they built once more, not temples, not towers, but ships. The longship was their masterpiece, slender, swift, alive. Its hull curved like the back of a serpent, cutting through both calm and storm. Each plank was chosen with care, each nail forged with faith. When it entered the sea, it was christened not with wine, but with words, runes carved into wood, a blessing whispered to the waves. They did not sail in search of war, they sailed in search of meaning. To see what lay beyond the mist was to understand the size of one's own soul. They followed the flight of ravens, the pull of the tide, the songs of migrating whales, and the sea, vast and mercurial, became their teacher. From the fjords of Norway to the green shores of the British Isles, they travelled. From the icy rivers of Russia to the sunlit markets of Byzantium. Some settled, others wandered. Everywhere they went, they carried their stories and left behind echoes. In Ireland, they built Dublin. In Normandy, they left their name, the land of the Northmen. In Iceland, they found new beginnings among fire and frost. And even across the great ocean, where few believed any land could exist, they reached the edges of North America, calling it Vinland, the land of wine. Their journeys were quiet symphonies of courage. Each voyage began with uncertainty and ended with understanding. They learned that the horizon is not an end, but a mirror, reflecting both the courage to go and the peace to return. When storms rose, they did not curse the sea. They spoke to it. They asked it to remember them kindly, to carry their ships home. If it did not, they believed their souls would still travel, not down, but forward, into the halls of their ancestors. The long ships were like time itself. Beautiful, fragile, unstoppable. Their sails caught the same wind that moved the clouds and whispered through pine forests far behind them. And as the waves rocked them into rhythm, each man felt both small and infinite. At night, under endless stars, they spoke softly. Some told tales of Odin's hall, where fallen warriors feasted in eternal light. Others wondered about the shape of the world, whether the ocean had an edge, or if it curved back upon itself, like a serpent biting its tail. There was poetry in their voyage, and silence in their strength. They were not conquerors of the earth, but listeners of it, reading the wind, following the currents, surrendering to what was greater than themselves. And when they reached new lands, they built again. Wooden homes near rivers, markets near harbours, altars under open sky. Everywhere they went, they planted fragments of their homeland. A carving, a song, a name. Trade flowed as freely as stories. Amber from the north met silk from the east. Iron met glass, honey met spice. Each exchange was more than survival. It was connection. In a world so vast, they had found a way to belong everywhere. But time, like tide, never stands still. The same curiosity that carried them outward began to carry ambition within. Small chieftains grew wealthy. Trade became power, and with power came the old temptations. To rule, to own, to control what once was shared. Still, on the quiet nights between voyages, the sea would remind them that everything returns to water and all things drift in time. Close your eyes for a moment. You can hear it, can't you? The creak of wood, the hiss of salt, the heartbeat of oars, the low chant of men rowing in rhythm with the world itself. Inhale and exhale. The journey is not over, it has simply changed direction. Every voyage, every landfall, every horizon, all of it, part of one endless breath. And so, the Norse people continued to move, carried by courage, guided by wonder, haunted, perhaps, by a question that only the sea could answer. How far can a soul travel before it finds home? Inhale. Hold for a moment. Exhale slowly, as though the wind itself were sighing. Every age of light casts its own shadow, and in the north, that shadow came quietly, not with thunder or blade, but with whispers carried on the wind. The golden rhythm of the Norse world began to change. Trade brought wealth, and wealth brought hunger, not of the body, but of the soul. Where once men built for need, they now built for name. Where once the sea was a friend, it became a path to power. Small chieftains turned to kings. They drew lines across maps that had never known borders, claiming what once belonged to all. The gatherings of the free, the old things beneath the open sky, gave way to thrones carved from ambition, and slowly the quiet circle of voices became the echo of command. The old gods still watched, but their temples grew empty. Christian ships came from the south, bearing crosses of silver and words of salvation. Many listened, weary of old sacrifices. longing for a peace that might last beyond the storm. But others held fast to Odin and Thor, to sagas that spoke of honor earned, not given. The Norse stood at a crossroad between worlds, one fading into myth, the other demanding faith in what could not be seen. Some tried to hold both, to hang a cross beside a hammer, to pray to two heavens at once. But even the most patient dawn cannot serve two suns. The harmony that once held their world together began to crack. Rival kings sought more land, more silver, more power. Families divided by belief and oath. The same ships that once carried trade and story now carried war. Still, for a while, beauty remained. Farmers still sowed fields under pale skies. Children still laughed among birch trees. And every evening, as the sun dipped below the fjords, the wind still smelled of pine and salt. But beneath that peace, something fragile was trembling. The sense that the old world was slipping quietly away. Bards sang softer now. Their songs were not of conquest or glory, but of longing. For the simplicity of the past, for nights when the only crown was the moon. They sang of heroes who sailed not for gold, but for the horizon, and of gods who once walked barefoot through forests of snow. Change is not always a storm. Sometimes it arrives like fog, slow, patient, wrapping the world until no one remembers when the air was clear. The Norse, who once feared nothing, began to fear time itself. The young looked south, dreaming of foreign lands and foreign faiths. The old looked north, toward mountains that had seen everything before. Both prayed, not for victory, but for understanding. And yet, the sea remained faithful. Even as kingdoms rose and fell, the waves kept their rhythm, the same waters that carried them out to the world, now returned to wash their shores clean again. It was as if the sea itself mourned, gently erasing the footprints of men, so that memory could rest without pain. One autumn, a storm unlike any before struck the coast. Winds howled through the valleys, tearing roofs from halls. Thunder cracked like ancient judgment. And when dawn came, whole villages had vanished into the tide. The survivors stood in silence, watching the sea reclaim what it had given. Some said it was punishment. Others said it was mercy. Perhaps it was both. From that day, the songs grew slower. The laughter of feast halls turned to murmurs of prayer. And though the world still spun, the spirit of the old North began to fade, not in defeat, but in surrender. For every civilization must rest, just as every flame must dim so that its smoke may rise to the stars. The Norse, who had conquered distance and defied death, now faced their greatest voyage, the passage into memory. Breathe in and out. Feel that stillness, the moment before sleep, the quiet space between what was and what will be. This was the shadow before the fall. Not darkness, but dusk. Not ending, but transformation. And somewhere, beyond the last horizon, the gods were silent, watching, waiting, as the light of their people drifted softly into legend. Inhale gently, and exhale, slow and long. Let the air settle around you, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The end did not come with fire. It came with stillness. The storms of ambition had spent themselves. The kings who once fought for crowns now slept beneath earth and moss. Their banners had turned to dust, their gold to rust. And above the graves, the wind sang softly, a lullaby for a world grown tired. In the fjords, the shipyards fell silent. No hammers rang, no sails unfurled. The sea, once thick with the crossing of longships, now mirrored the sky, wide, empty, and still. The people who remained no longer spoke of glory. They spoke of the harvest, of children, of weather. The great sagas gave way to small prayers whispered before dawn. The gods, too, seemed quieter. Temples to Odin and Thor were left to the snow, their beams creaking like old bones. The carved faces of idols stared blankly toward horizons where no ships returned. A new faith had taken root, one of peace and promise. Where the cross stood, where the hammer once did, the old and the new existed side by side for a time. Each reflected in the other like twin moons in a winter lake. Yet something precious was fading, not belief, but belonging. The Norse heart that once beat in rhythm with storm and stone, now slowed, as if listening for a sound it could no longer hear. Villages shrank. The young left for foreign courts or quiet cloisters. The old sat by the hearth, speaking less and remembering more. They told their grandchildren of a world that had once burned bright, of sails that shone like wings in the sun, of fires that lit the midnight sky, of voices singing across water until the echoes were mistaken for thunder. But those grandchildren only half believed. To them, those stories were dreams, too grand, too distant, too filled with gods who no longer answered. And so the past became legend. And legend became silence. Even the language began to change. Old words softened, old meanings blurred. Runes, once carved deep into stone, were replaced by smooth letters and softer prayers. The songs of warriors became hymns for the weary. The sagas were written down, not to be lived again, but to be remembered. And yet, not all was lost. For memory has its own way of surviving. It hides in the corners of language, in the turn of a melody, in the way light falls through pine at dawn. It lingers in the scent of wood smoke and salt, in the quiet dignity of endurance. Nature, too, remembered. The forests grew back where towns had stood. Deer walked the old roads without fear. Grass covered the mounds of forgotten kings, and when the northern lights returned each winter, their glow seemed softer, as though mourning or forgiving. On nights like those, fishermen at sea would pause their rowing and look up. They would see green fire curling across the stars, and for a moment feel the weight of time, the knowledge that their ancestors had seen this same sky, breathed this same cold air, and vanished into this same light. Perhaps that was the true legacy of the North, not its empires or its wars, but its endurance. A quiet truth, whispered from one soul to another, that nothing truly ends, it only changes form. The old saga said that at the end of days, the gods themselves would fall in a final battle called Ragnarök. The sky would crack, the seas would rise, and the world would be reborn. But maybe, just maybe, that was never prophecy. Maybe it was memory. A reminder that even in collapse, there is renewal. For though the voices of the Norse faded, their spirit did not die. It drifted, like mist, into the future, settling in the hearts of poets and dreamers, of those who still look toward the sea and wonder. Inhale and exhale. The fire has dimmed, but it has not gone out. It burns now as warmth in the quiet, as courage in the unseen, as story in the sleeping world. And so the age of the Vikings passed, not destroyed, not forgotten, but folded gently into time. Inhale and exhale. The storm has passed. What remains is not silence, but a softer kind of sound. The hum of wind through empty halls, the heartbeat of the earth beneath forgotten stones. Time moved gently over the north. Centuries blurred, and the world changed its face. Yet beneath the frost and the soil, something ancient kept breathing. The memory of a people who once lived as close to the sea as to their own souls. In the ruins of old longhouses, grass grew between timbers. Birds nested where smoke once rose. A child playing there, long after the Norse had gone, might find a rusted nail or a piece of amber in the dirt. And though he wouldn't know its story, he would feel it. A small pulse of warmth from another age. The sagas survived the centuries, carried first by memory, then by ink. They passed from tongue to parchment, from firelight to candlelight. What had once been sung in mead halls was now whispered in monasteries. And though the words were softened by time, the soul within them remained sharp, bright as the northern stars they once followed. Across Europe, the Norse became myth. To some, they were raiders, to others, explorers, poets, craftsmen. But within their own descendants, scattered through lands they once sailed, they became something deeper. A feeling, an echo, a reminder of endurance. In Iceland, storytellers gathered each winter to recite the old sagas of heroes, gods, and lovers who defied both sea and fate. Their voices filled small rooms with warmth against the long dark. Outside, snow drifted over the same hills their ancestors had once crossed barefoot. Inside, history became human again. Every story was a fire rekindled, each word a spark that refused to die. The old gods may have faded, but their symbols endured in silence. Thor's hammer hung quietly beside crosses in small villages. Odin's ravens, carved in wood and stone, still watched over doors. Even those who no longer believed still honored what those symbols meant. Strength, wisdom, sacrifice, love. It was not faith that survived, but understanding. The Norse had once believed that life was not about victory, but about the beauty of striving. That a man's worth was not measured by his triumph, but by how he faced the storm. That truth lingered, passed down not as doctrine, but as instinct. You can still feel it, even now. In the patience of a fisherman mending his net beneath grey skies, in the endurance of pine trees bending to snow, in the quiet pride of a people who build, lose, and build again. The Norse world became part of the world's language. Words like sky, window, knife, husband, law. Echoes of their tongue woven into English, like the ghost of a song still humming in another melody. Their myths inspired painters, poets, dreamers. From medieval monks to modern storytellers who still whisper of gods and giants, of storms and fate. The ships they built have vanished, but their shape remains in every vessel that crosses an ocean. The runes they carved have faded from stone, but their pattern remains in every hand that writes, in every story that begins with once upon a time. At night, when the aurora shimmers over northern skies, people still stop and look up, and for a moment, it feels as though the old world is still alive, its breath moving through the colors of the air. Children, watching from windows, ask what those lights are. And somewhere, a voice, maybe a parent, maybe the wind, whispers, "They're the fires of the old gods, still burning above us." The Norse are gone, but they are everywhere. In the myths that shaped imagination, in the courage that shaped discovery, in the quiet resilience that shaped endurance. Every civilization leaves behind a gift. Theirs was not gold, nor conquest, nor empire. It was a way of seeing that the world is alive, that time is sacred, and that every end is only another beginning. So, as the night deepens, and the stars gather like dust over the northern sky, listen. The wind you hear is not empty. It is the same wind that once filled the sails of longships, that once carried songs across oceans, that still carries the memory of names carved on water. Inhale and exhale. Let that memory drift through you, calm, endless, eternal. For though the Norse have fallen into legend, their story has not ended. It simply sleeps beneath mountains, beneath words, beneath the quiet rhythm of the sea. Breathe in, hold for 4 counts, exhale slowly. The past drifts closer now, not as memory, but as meaning. Every civilization leaves behind something more than ruins. The Norse left behind a rhythm, the slow, steady heartbeat of endurance. They did not conquer eternity, they conversed with it. And though their ships have vanished, the wake they left upon the sea has never fully stilled. From them we inherit not just stories of gods and warriors, but lessons carved in wind and salt. How to live bravely, how to belong to the earth, and how to face the unknown with open eyes. The Vikings understood that life was both fragile and infinite. They sailed knowing the sea could take them. Yet they went, not because they sought death, but because they sought life in its fullest, widest form. They accepted uncertainty as a companion, not an enemy, and in that acceptance lay their quiet wisdom. Even now, in the modern hum of cities, you can still feel echoes of their courage, in those who leave home to build something new, in those who rise again after loss, in those who face the unknown and whisper, "Let's see what lies beyond." Their sense of connection between man, nature, and spirit was not philosophy, it was daily breath. They knew the land did not belong to them, they belonged to the land. They knew every storm, every harvest, every season was part of a greater conversation between the human and the divine. Perhaps that is why their stories endure, because deep down we still crave that harmony, to feel the wind and know it speaks, to hear the rain and know it listens. The Norse believed in balance. Every act of creation demanded respect. Every victory demanded humility. Every life, no matter how small, left a mark on the great fabric of being. They understood that honor was not loud, it was consistent, patient, and kind. Their sagas teach us that strength and softness are not opposites, they are partners. The same hand that holds the sword must also know how to build the cradle, how to steer the ship gently through mist, how to let go when the tide demands it. When we remember the Vikings, we often imagine war and flame, but the truer story lies in their silence, in the way they waited out long winters, in the songs they sang to keep fear at bay, in the laughter that survived the cold. They remind us that endurance is an art, that courage can be quiet, that legacy is not measured in power, but in peace. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the northern sky, wide, pale, endless. Imagine standing on the edge of a cliff, the sea stretching forever below. You feel small, yet infinite. A single breath in the long rhythm of creation. That feeling, that mix of awe and calm, was the heartbeat of the Norse world, and it can still be ours. We live in an age of noise, but they remind us to listen. We chase permanence, but they teach us to embrace change. We build walls, but they left theirs open to the wind. In the end, the Norse legacy is not about conquest, but about continuity. To live as they did is to walk through the world awake, to feel the ground beneath your feet, to hear your own breath, to look toward the horizon and whisper, "Thank you." Their temples may be gone, but their wisdom lingers in every place touched by salt and sky, in every port where people meet, trade, and share, in every word that crosses borders, in every dream that dares to travel farther than fear. So as the night deepens and your thoughts grow lighter, remember this. You, too, are part of that same story. You are the voyager now. Your ship is made of time. Your ocean is the breath between heartbeats. And when the winds of the world grow harsh, think of them, the quiet ones who once faced the endless sea and smiled. Inhale, hold, exhale. Let their courage become your calm. Let their spirit rest within your own. For the true lesson of the Vikings is not how they conquered the world, but how they learned to live within it, wild, free, and unafraid of the dark. Inhale, hold gently, exhale. Let your breath become mist in the air of memory. The story of the North is ending now, softly, like snow falling into water. The voices have grown faint, the fires dim. But somewhere, deep within the silence, the heart of the old world still beats, slow, steady, eternal. Night stretches over the northern sky. The aurora drifts like ribbons of forgotten song, weaving green and silver through the dark. Beneath it lies the land that once roared with life. Fjords carved by ice, mountains crowned with frost, rivers whispering through moss and stone. All is still now. The gods have slept, the kings have gone, the long ships rest beneath the sea. Yet the world remembers. The wind that crosses the pine forests carries words older than any book. It hums softly, like a mother singing to a child. A lullaby that says, "You are part of everything, and everything is part of you." And in that truth, there is peace. The Norse believed that every end is a beginning, that every night, no matter how long, ends in dawn. They were right. The world they built has dissolved into time, but its soul has simply changed form. into story, into spirit, into silence. You can still find it, if you listen closely, in the rhythm of oars striking water, in the creak of wood in the wind, in the hush before snowfall. Each sound carries a fragment of that ancient breath, the one that once filled sails, hearts, and skies. The earth has covered their ruins with gentleness. Moss has softened the stone. Grass has folded over graves. And wildflowers bloom where battles were once fought. Nature has forgiven, as it always does. It does not erase, it transforms. Somewhere, a traveller stands by a quiet shore, watching the same sea their ancestors crossed 1,000 years ago. The air is cold, but kind. The horizon glows faintly with the promise of another sunrise. They close their eyes, and for a moment, they can almost hear it. The song of the Old North. The pulse of the world that never truly died. That is the secret gift of history. It never leaves. It simply waits for those who remember how to listen. And so, as you lie here now, between breath and dream, between silence and sleep, the story becomes yours. Inhale, hold, exhale. The same air that moved the sails of the Vikings moves through you. The same stars that guided them shimmer above your world. The same courage that carried them across endless seas lives quietly within your chest. The North is not gone. It has simply turned to dream, a dream that drifts through time like fog across water. When you wake tomorrow, the echo will remain. A calmness, a strength, a sense that you have travelled far through the night and returned whole. Because in truth, you have. You have journeyed through centuries, through frost and fire, through faith and forgetting, and arrived here at the edge of stillness. Now, let go. Let the noise fade. Let your thoughts fall like snow upon quiet ground. The story is over, but its warmth remains. It rests now in your breath, in the small peace between heartbeats. The North sleeps. The sea sighs. The stars keep watch. And you are safe. You are home. Fall asleep to the Norse legends of the Vikings. Rise and fall. The night holds you. The world is at rest. Inhale once more. And as you exhale, drift gently into the sleep of the North.